She stepped into the house like she owned it. Not in the arrogant way some people carry themselves, but in that effortless, gliding way that makes you realize you've been replaced before you even had a chance to compete. Her suitcase wheels clicked softly against the tile, her perfume trailing behind her in a warm cloud of vanilla and citrus, unsettling and sweet. I stood at the top of the stairs, frozen mid-step, watching her kiss my father's cheek with lips too glossy and a smile too polished to be sincere. Her hair was long and golden, wavy in the kind of way that suggested deliberate heat and hours in front of a mirror. Her dress was short, tight. Her heels clicked confidently as she turned in a slow, fluid motion to look up at me. My throat clenched. She looked too young, not just compared to him, but compared to me. There was a moment of vertigo, of dissonance, where I had to process the fact that my father had married someone younger than his own daughter. He'd mentioned a woman, someone he'd been seeing. He hadn't used words like love or marriage, but there had been a glimmer in his eyes during that last call, a kind of nervous energy I hadn't seen in years. I thought it was nothing, a phase, a fling. I didn't expect her to be real, let alone here, in our home, with her hand resting possessively on his arm like she belonged to the architecture. Her name was Scarlett. That much I learned quickly, though it didn't fit her. Scarlett sounded like a stage name, something whispered in dimly lit rooms and written in red lipstick on bathroom mirrors. She had the kind of body that made rooms tilt slightly off balance, legs that seemed longer than logic allowed, hips that swayed without apology, a waist that disappeared under the cinch of a black belt. Her skin was smooth and sun-kissed, her makeup subtle but transformative. She looked like a curated fantasy, airbrushed, composed, unreal. And now she was my stepmother. Sat in my mouth like sour milk. Stepmother. I was 30. I had my own apartment, my own career, my own messes to manage. I didn't need a new maternal figure, least of all one who looked like she belonged on a magazine cover and shopped exclusively in boutiques where the dresses didn't come in sizes, only names. She moved with fluidity through the living room, her fingertips brushing the back of the couch, the edge of the picture frame. Everything she touched felt like it might transform beneath her hand, including the air. She glanced at me again, her eyes scanning without judgment, but with something else, something hard to name. Not assessment, not intimidation, but a kind of curiosity that felt like it reached beneath my skin. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was loud enough. My father, oblivious to the quiet war unfolding between us, offered to take her bags upstairs. She declined. She said she liked to get a feel for spaces first, to settle into the energy. I hated that phrase immediately. The energy in the house had already shifted the moment she crossed the threshold, and whatever it was now, it wasn't settled. I escaped to the kitchen, hoping to find refuge in cold tile and the hum of the refrigerator. But her voice followed me, a lilting, melodic sound that curled around corners like smoke. She laughed easily, moved like she was being filmed. I opened the fridge and stared at its contents without seeing anything. My pulse was too loud in my ears. I wasn't jealous, not exactly. I wasn't even angry. I was disoriented, thrown into a world where the roles I thought were fixed had been redefined without warning. I had always been the daughter, the caretaker, the one who worried about my father's health and scolded him for forgetting appointments. Now, suddenly, he had someone younger, prettier, easier to impress. Later, I returned to my room, closed the door, and leaned against it with my eyes shut. The house smelled different now, less like lemon cleaner and more like her. That soft, cloying scent that clung to furniture and fabric. I kicked off my shoes and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was temporary, that she'd grow bored or he would, and the balance would restore itself, but I didn't believe it. That night, I heard her laugh again, a low, velvety sound that floated up the staircase and slipped beneath my door. I pulled the covers over my head, but it didn't help. That laugh settled into my chest like a question I didn't know how to answer. Who was she really? What did she want? And why did the thought of her staying make my skin feel too tight, too hot, too aware? I didn't sleep much. The bed felt unfamiliar, like even it had begun to change under the weight of her presence. Something had shifted, something irreversible. I wasn't sure what it was yet, but I knew it started the moment her suitcase rolled across our floor. She had a habit of leaving the bathroom door slightly open when she showered. Steam would drift out into the hallway, curling along the ceiling like breath held too long. The scent of jasmine would follow soon after, sharp, floral, unmistakably hers. It wasn't a smell that belonged in this house. My mother had always used eucalyptus or lavender, earthy and subdued, but jasmine was wild. It was lush and sticky and sweet. It lingered in the air long after she'd gone, like a perfume worn by the walls themselves. I found myself standing near that hallway more than I wanted to admit, pretending to pass by, pretending to need something from my father's room, but really, I was listening to the soft splash of water, the occasional hum of her voice, the rhythmic creak of tile as she moved. Then there would be the sound I couldn't ignore, the thick, wet snap of a towel pulled from its hook, followed by the unmistakable hush of fabric dragged across wet skin. I could picture it too clearly, her arms lifted, the towel slipping down the length of her back, the drops of water catching the light as they slid down the curve of her spine. I hated how vivid it was. I hated that I didn't look away, even in my own mind. She would step into the hallway a moment later, towel wrapped around her like a loosely held promise, skin glowing from the heat, hair darkened and clinging to her collarbones. Her legs always bare, her feet soft against the hardwood. I never knew where to look. Sometimes she'd pass me without saying a word, just a glance, not long enough to qualify as confrontation, but not brief enough to be empty. It was a look that hovered just on the edge of invitation. I'd return it, expression unreadable, but my heart would stumble with every step she took. Her towel was always too small, or maybe her body was simply too much to be contained. One shoulder always exposed, one hip visible with each careful movement, the edge of the fabric rising when she reached for the banister. I hated the way it made me feel, that sudden sharp jolt in my stomach, that burn behind my eyes that came from holding my breath too long. The first time I noticed her underwear in the laundry, I froze, not because it was there, but because of what it looked like. Lace, deep red, something expensive and intentionally delicate. It wasn't the kind of thing you wore for comfort. It was the kind of thing you wore when you wanted to be seen. I picked it up, just for a second, and something in me twisted. I dropped it like it was hot, like it could expose the thought I wasn't ready to admit. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was normal, that women wear lingerie all the time. But there was nothing normal about the way her scent clung to the fabric. I could smell her on it, jasmine and skin, and something else. Something almost metallic and warm, like heat sealed in silk. I left the laundry basket and walked out of the room like it had betrayed me. She was always barefoot in the mornings, padding around the kitchen with a coffee mug in hand, her robe tied loosely at the waist. She never rushed. Everything she did was deliberate, slow, as if time bent itself around her. The robe would shift when she reached for something, parting just slightly at the chest or riding up at the thigh. I pretended to be immersed in my phone, in the news, in my breakfast, but I saw everything. The arch of her foot, the soft indent above her knee, the shadow of her collarbone when she tilted her head back to drink. I told myself I wasn't watching. I told myself it wasn't intentional. But she always moved through the room like she knew she was being seen, like she wanted to be. One afternoon, I found her lying across the living room couch, a book in her hand, and her legs stretched out across the cushions. She wore a tank top and a pair of cotton shorts so thin they may as well have been underwear. Her skin caught the light, smooth, warm, flawless. Her knee was bent, the other leg draped over the arm of the couch. The position was lazy, comfortable, but there was a quiet elegance to it, like a painting come to life. I walked in, and she didn't move, just looked up at me with those unreadable eyes, as if asking a question without forming the words. My throat went dry. I sat in the chair across from her, pretending to check my messages, but my fingers hovered above the screen without typing. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I would have said even if I had the nerve. The room was filled with the scent of jasmine again. It clung to the cushions, seeped into the carpet, wrapped itself around my senses like a net. Every breath felt heavy, slow. My body ached with something unnamed, and my thoughts became a quiet war between memory and desire. She turned a page in her book. Her fingers were slender, nails painted a pale pink, the kind of details I never noticed on anyone else. But with her, everything mattered. Every detail was amplified, given weight. I stared at her lips when she licked them, at the hollow of her throat when she sighed, at the small, subtle movements that meant nothing, but somehow meant everything. That night, I lay awake for hours. I could still smell her in the air. I could still see her, sprawled out, relaxed, untouchable. And yet, she wasn't untouchable. She was here, in the same house, down the hall, wrapped in jasmine and moonlight. I closed my eyes and tried to banish the images, but they only grew sharper. Her towel slipping, her mouth parting, her skin beneath my fingertips, even though I'd never touched her. I hated myself for it, but not enough to stop imagining, not enough to stop wanting. I pulled the blanket over my head and breathed in the emptiness. My skin burned where the air touched it. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I wasn't afraid of her. I was afraid of what she was waking up in me, and it was only just beginning. It was early. Not dawn exactly, but that liminal space between night and morning when the house still feels asleep. The air was cool, heavy with the silence that clings to walls before the day begins. I padded down the hallway barefoot, my skin still warm from sleep, hair tangled, thoughts fuzzy. I wasn't expecting to see anyone. The kitchen light was on, but I assumed it had been left that way by my father, who often forgot such details. I didn't expect her. She stood by the fridge, the door open, her body illuminated by the soft interior light. She was wearing my t-shirt. Not just any shirt, one I'd had for years, worn in and stretched at the collar, oversized in a way that had always made it feel like armor. On her, it looked like something else entirely. It clung in places I hadn't known it could cling. It bared the length of her legs, stopped just below the curve of her ass, and when she turned slightly, I realized she wasn't wearing anything underneath. My breath caught, my mouth went dry. I froze in the doorway, watching her lift a carton of milk to her lips and drink straight from it, throat moving with each swallow. It was something raw, intimate, almost primal in its simplicity. And then, as she lowered the carton, a single drop lingered on her bottom lip, round, white, trembling with the weight of itself before slipping slowly down the curve of her chin. I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor, my body suddenly electric with sensation. She didn't see me right away. She wiped her lip with the back of her hand, lazy, careless, like it meant nothing. But it meant everything. That drop was a live wire between us. It pulsed through me in waves. I felt it in my fingertips, in the base of my spine, in the hollow just beneath my stomach. When she finally noticed me, she didn't flinch. She didn't cover herself. She just met my gaze. And for a second, the world stilled. There was no embarrassment, no awkward laughter, no attempt to explain. Just silence. Thick, loaded, a kind of acknowledgement that neither of us could take back. Her eyes didn't leave mine as she stepped away from the fridge and placed the carton on the counter. I should have looked away. I should have turned around, made some excuse, gone back to my room, and buried myself under the safety of blankets. But I didn't. I stood there, heart pounding against my ribs like a warning. The space between us shrank with every passing second, not physically, but in some other way, some deeper, more dangerous way. I could feel the shift happening. Something irreversible was unfurling quietly beneath our skin. She moved with a casual grace, walking past me as if this were routine, as if my eyes hadn't just mapped every inch of her legs, the way the shirt rose with her stride, the gentle sway of her hips. Her scent followed her, a mix of sleep, jasmine, and warmth. When her shoulder brushed mine, it felt like my skin had been stripped bare. A shiver danced down my spine, sharp and immediate. I didn't exhale until she was gone, her footsteps fading up the stairs, the soft hum of the house returning like a curtain falling after a scene. I stood in the kitchen, alone now, surrounded by silence and fluorescent light. I looked at the milk carton on the counter and imagined the shape of her lips on its rim. I imagined the trace of her warmth still inside. I reached out, hesitated, then pulled my hand back as if it might burn me. The moment had passed, but it had left a mark. Not a scar, not yet. Something softer, more insidious, a bruise beneath the surface of thought. I turned off the light and returned to my room in the dark, footsteps silent, heart loud. That night followed me. It curled into the corners of my thoughts, whispered in the quiet moments when I was alone. I replayed it, frame by frame. Her bare legs, the curve of her mouth, the drop of milk, her gaze. Not challenging, not coy, just aware. Entirely, devastatingly aware. And I began to wonder if this had always been her plan, or if I had invited it by watching, wanting, waiting. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't write it down or try to analyze it. But I started wearing different clothes around the house. I started moving differently, slower, more careful, or maybe more deliberate. The next morning, I wore her robe instead of my own, left my hair loose, walked barefoot across the tile, even when it was cold. I didn't see her that day, but I felt her in everything I did, as if she had melted into the house itself, slipped beneath my skin, and begun to rewrite the rhythm of my breath. Something had changed, not loudly, not with fireworks or confessions, but subtly, like a shift in temperature you only notice once you're already shivering. And I couldn't pretend I didn't want more, even if I didn't understand why, even if it terrified me, even if it was wrong in every way I'd been taught to recognize. It was one of those nights that stretched longer than it should, thick with silence and the hum of appliances that felt too loud in the stillness. The clock had already tipped past midnight, but I wasn't tired. Or maybe I was too wired to rest. My room felt too small, too warm, too full of thoughts that had no shape but refused to leave. I slipped out quietly, not expecting anyone else to be awake. The living room was dark, lit only by the soft blue wash of moonlight through the half-open blinds, and the faint flicker from the television screen still paused on a scene I didn't remember watching. She was there, curled on the end of the couch like a painting, knees folded, one arm draped over the backrest, the other holding a glass of something dark and red that caught the light and shimmered like liquid garnet. Her robe had fallen open slightly at the thigh, exposing a long stretch of bare skin. Her tank top clung to her in places that made my breath pause. She didn't startle at my arrival. She turned her head slowly, like she had been expecting me. The air between us shifted, pulled taut. I crossed the room without speaking, without knowing why, and sat on the opposite end of the couch. Not close enough to touch, but too close to ignore. The silence between us wasn't empty. It pulsed with a rhythm I was only just beginning to understand. The glass in her hand trembled slightly as she set it down on the floor beside her. I could feel her gaze on me, steady, quiet, unreadable. We both stared at the screen, though neither of us saw anything. The sound was muted, the images meaningless. What mattered was the space between us, the charged weight of the moment, the tension coiled beneath our skin. I could hear her breathing, slow, deep, measured. I matched it without thinking. My pulse had moved into my fingertips, my throat, the space just beneath my ribs. She shifted slightly, and the edge of her knee brushed mine. The contact was brief, feather-light, but it sent a current through me so sharp and nearly flinched. I held still. I held my breath. Her fingers moved across the fabric of the couch, inching closer to mine. Each second felt like an hour. When our hands finally met, it wasn't accidental. Her pinky brushed mine, then lingered, a deliberate touch, a quiet question. I didn't pull away. Our hands touched, not held, not gripped, just rested against each other, skin to skin, warmth against warmth. Her thumb slid along the back of my hand in a slow, lazy motion, like she was drawing something only she could see. I turned my head and looked at her. Her eyes were already on me, dark and still, like a mirror reflecting all the things I hadn't said. Her body shifted toward mine, subtly, like a tide moving in. The robe slipped further, exposing more of her thigh, the soft dip of her shoulder. I couldn't stop my eyes from following the line of her collarbone to the place where it disappeared beneath her top. Her hair was slightly damp, clinging to her neck. I wanted to reach out and touch it. I wanted to know how she tasted. Her lips parted slightly, and I could see the shine of moisture on them, the faintest quiver, like she was about to say something, but no words came. She didn't need them. She leaned in, and I did too. The kiss wasn't sudden. It unfolded, slowly, like a door being opened. Her lips brushed mine with the barest pressure, tentative but unmistakable. My heart stumbled, my body tightened. Then the kiss deepened, and something inside me gave way. She tasted like wine and heat and something utterly foreign but dangerously familiar. Her hand moved to my jaw, fingers tracing the line of my neck, and my own hands found the curve of her waist, the warmth of her beneath the robe. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I kissed her harder, more urgently, and she responded with the same hunger, the same quiet desperation. We moved together like we had always known this was coming. Her legs shifted, wrapping around one of mine, pulling me closer. I felt the softness of her thighs, the press of her chest against mine, the sigh that escaped her when I touched her bare back. Her skin was hot beneath my fingertips, smooth and alive. I wanted to drown in it. She pushed me gently backward until I lay on the couch, her body stretched over mine. The television screen flickered behind her like a strobe, casting shadows across her face. Her hand slid beneath my shirt, nails grazing lightly over my ribs, my stomach higher. I gasped, hips arching instinctively. The kiss broke only so she could look at me, eyes wild, pupils wide, her breathing ragged. She pulled her tank top over her head in one motion, tossing it aside, and my eyes locked onto the bare curves revealed to me, familiar and unknown all at once. I reached up, my hands finding the weight of her breasts, the firmness beneath the softness, the warmth of her skin radiating through my palms. Her lips returned to mine with a growl, low and soft, and then she kissed down my neck, my collarbone, taking her time, savoring every inch. Clothes vanished between kisses and touches, skin pressed against skin. Every moan, every sigh, every breath became a conversation we had never dared to have. When she settled between my legs, her hair falling like a curtain around us, I felt the last piece of hesitation melt away. I gave myself to her fully, not just my body, but everything I had tried to lock away. She touched me like she already knew how, as if my body had always been hers to learn, to hold, to adore. And when I came undone beneath her, trembling, gasping, clinging, it felt less like surrender and more like returning, like finding something I had never known I was missing. We lay tangled on the couch, half covered, bodies slick with sweat, limbs wrapped around each other like a promise we hadn't spoken aloud. The clock kept ticking. The screen eventually went dark, but neither of us moved. Her fingers traced lazy patterns along my arm. Her breath was warm against my chest. I didn't want the moment to end. I didn't want the night to pass. Something had broken open, something we couldn't take back. And in the silence after, I didn't feel regret. I felt infinite. I felt real. I felt hers. The morning came with an unsettling kind of stillness. The kind that feels too quiet, too composed, like the air itself is trying to hide the aftermath. I woke tangled in the sheets, limbs sore in that delicious aching way that comes only after surrender. Her scent was still on my skin, warmth and salt and jasmine, now mixed with something darker, deeper. I stretched slowly, letting the memory of the night ripple through me. Her mouth, her hands, the weight of her body pressed against mine. It wasn't a dream. It had happened, fully, entirely, unapologetically. I padded to the bathroom in silence, washed my face, splashed cold water down my neck, but the mirror wouldn't let me escape. My reflection looked unfamiliar. My skin glowed faintly, flushed in places, raw in others. My lips were still slightly swollen. I stared at myself, trying to make sense of who I was now, trying to pull the girl from yesterday out from under this new version of me that had kissed her stepmother back like it was survival. In the kitchen, she was already there. Coffee brewing, back turned, hips swaying gently to music playing low from her phone. She wore one of my sweatshirts again, sleeves too long, her legs bare beneath the hem. I watched her move as I approached, hypnotized by how normal she looked, how at ease, like nothing had happened, like everything had. And then I saw it. She turned slightly, laughing at something on her phone, brushing hair from her face, and the light caught it. The ring, that damn ring, thin, gold, glinting from her left hand like a slap. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even particularly ornate, but it sliced through me with precision. All the breath left my body in a rush I tried to hide. My stomach tightened, my skin chilled. That band of metal, that quiet, perfect circle wrapped around her finger, became the loudest thing in the room. It echoed with every heartbeat, every flash of memory from the night before. I sat down without a word, my eyes fixed on the table, on the mug she placed in front of me. Her hand brushed mine again, just a flicker of contact, and it burned. Not with desire this time, but with awareness. She was someone's wife, my father's wife. That ring was a contract, a boundary, a betrayal hanging off her hand like a warning I had chosen to ignore. I stared at the coffee but didn't drink. My thoughts were spiraling, slipping between what we had done and what it meant. My father's voice came uninvited into my mind, the way he used to talk about trust, about family. I imagined his hands holding hers at the altar, imagined him placing that ring on her finger, smiling at her like she was a new beginning. And I felt sick, because that ring was still there, because she hadn't taken it off, not even after what we'd done. The shame crept in slowly, like a tide. At first, just the toes, a little dampness, a chill. Then it climbed, swallowed the ankles, the knees, the ribs. I tried to shake it off, tried to remind myself that I wasn't the one who had made vows. But the truth was, I had still crossed a line. I had still stepped into something sacred and dirtied it with want. And the worst part wasn't that I had betrayed him. It was that I didn't regret it. Not really. I still felt her in every cell of my body. I still craved her eyes on me, her mouth, her weight. And that was the real rot at the center of everything, that I wanted her more that I knew I shouldn't. She talked casually, as if nothing had shifted, as if the night before hadn't fractured the ground beneath us. Her laugh was light, her movements fluid, but I saw the way her fingers curled slightly when they rested on the countertop. I saw the way her eyes flicked to me and then quickly away. She wasn't unaffected. She was pretending, the same way I was. We were both performing normalcy while that ring screamed from her hand like a siren. The day dragged. I left the house just to breathe different air, walked aimlessly, ignored messages, sat on a bench in a park, and tried to sort through the chaos in my head. There were no easy answers, no clean exits. I couldn't unfeel her. I couldn't erase the heat that still pulsed low in my stomach every time I remembered her mouth. But I also couldn't ignore what that ring meant, what she meant to someone else, what she had meant to him before she ever touched me. When I returned home, she was in the living room again, curled into herself, watching something on TV she clearly wasn't paying attention to. Her eyes met mine when I entered, and for the first time since that night, I saw something crack in her expression. A flicker of doubt, or maybe guilt. But she didn't speak, neither did I. The silence stretched, tense and suffocating. I went to my room and shut the door behind me, leaning against it like it could hold back the weight pressing in on my chest. I sat on the floor, legs pulled to my chest, and stared at nothing for a long time. All I could see was the way her lips had parted beneath mine, the way her back had arched when I touched her, the way she had moaned my name in the dark. And then, always, that ring, that thin, golden noose wrapped around her finger, reminding me who she was supposed to be. I tried to sleep that night, but couldn't. I kept seeing her face, kept imagining her lying awake, her hand resting on the sheet, the ring catching moonlight, turning it into something sharp. My body betrayed me again. I ached for her, even as I resented her, even as I hated myself for still wanting. The shadow of that ring followed me everywhere. It wasn't just metal. It was a wall, a warning, a truth I couldn't avoid. But desire doesn't care about promises made by other people. It burns anyway. It spreads. And now it was inside me, gnawing, growing, devouring logic and reason one heartbeat at a time. I wrote the letter in silence. No music, no distractions, just the sound of the pen dragging across paper and my own breathing, uneven, shallow, like I was running without moving. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd eaten dinners, played board games, celebrated birthdays. The same table where she once sat across from me in nothing but a robe, sipping coffee like she didn't taste like sin. My hands shook as I wrote, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The words poured out fast and brutal, like blood from a deep cut. I didn't dress them up or hide behind metaphors. I told him what happened. I told him everything. I started with the night in the living room. I described the way she touched me, the way I touched her, the way it wasn't an accident. I didn't leave room for ambiguity. I didn't try to soften the blow. He deserved to know the truth, not just what she did, but what I allowed, what I wanted, what I kept going back to. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't explain myself. There was no defense, only confession. Naked, humiliating, real. When the letter was finished, I folded it carefully, pressed it flat with my palms, and placed it in a plain white envelope. I didn't write his name on the outside. I didn't need to. I left it on his desk, right on top of the stack of paperwork he always meant to file but never did. I stood in the doorway of his study for a long time, staring at the envelope, imagining his face when he read it. I saw the confusion first, then the horror, then the grief. I imagined the way his hands would tremble, the way his eyes would dart across the page, hoping to find something that would make it all untrue. But he wouldn't. I'd made sure of that. There was no room for denial. I left the house that afternoon without saying goodbye. I walked until my feet ached, until the sky turned the color of ash and the wind picked up around me like it knew something had ended. I stayed out until long after dark, wandering the edges of my neighborhood like a ghost, avoiding the house that no longer felt like mine. When I finally returned, the living room lights were off. The kitchen was quiet. I climbed the stairs slowly, expecting to find her gone, but her door was open and her suitcase was still there. She sat on the edge of the bed, legs crossed, face pale. She didn't look at me when I walked past. I didn't look back. I went to my room, shut the door, and curled up on the floor, arms around my knees, back against the cold wood. I didn't cry. I was too hollow for tears. I waited. The storm came the next day. His voice thundered through the walls. I stayed upstairs, heart racing, pulse in my ears. I heard her crying. I heard him yelling things I couldn't make out, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. A man unraveling, a man betrayed by the only people he thought he could trust. I didn't move. I didn't try to intervene. I deserved every ounce of it. I wanted him to hate me. I wanted him to feel it. Maybe then I could feel it too. When the front door finally slammed and her footsteps ran up the stairs, I knew it was over. She didn't pack. She just grabbed a few things and disappeared. The silence that followed was so absolute, it felt like the house had collapsed inward. My father didn't speak to me for 2 days. He walked past me like I wasn't there. I watched him from the hallway, shoulders heavy, eyes distant, as he sat in his chair and stared at nothing. I had never seen him that small. She didn't call. She didn't come back. I assumed that was it. A clean break, a wound left to rot. But 3 weeks later, she knocked on my door. It was raining. Her hair clung to her face, her eyes swollen, her skin pale and wet. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood there, shivering. And then she spoke. 1 sentence, 8 words, simple, devastating, quiet. I didn't respond. I stepped aside. She walked in. She looked thinner. Her lips cracked. Her hands trembled. She said she hadn't eaten all day. I made her tea. We didn't speak. We sat across from each other in the kitchen where it all began, and then she reached across the table and placed my hand on her stomach. I didn't understand at first. I looked up, confused, and then I felt it, soft, subtle, a curve that hadn't been there before. She didn't wear the ring. She told me she hadn't planned it, that it wasn't a trap, that she only knew for sure a week ago, that she didn't want to lie anymore, that she hadn't touched my father since the night we crossed the line, that she left the ring in the hotel room the morning after their last fight, that she had nowhere else to go. I couldn't speak. I stared at her hand, still resting over mine. My body felt like stone, my mind blank. All I could think about was that night on the couch, the way she whispered my name, the way her body arched beneath me, the way she said I made her feel alive. And now she was carrying something inside her, something that might be part of me. I didn't ask questions. I didn't make promises. I just pulled her into me and held her as she cried. Her tears soaked my shirt. Her breath came in shudders. She smelled like rain and regret. I didn't tell her I loved her. I didn't know if I did, but I knew I couldn't send her away. My father never looked at me the same again. He never asked for explanations. He just shut himself off, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to reach. I lost him, maybe forever, but I gained something else, something impossible, something terrifying, something that cried in the night and kicked beneath her skin. She stayed, not because I asked her to, but because she wanted to. We shared a bed, shared silence, shared guilt, and slowly shared hope. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how we live with what we've done, but I know this. When I placed my hand on her belly and felt the first flutter of movement beneath my palm, I didn't feel shame. I felt the beginning of something I didn't have words for. And maybe that's all I'll ever have, but it's real and it's mine.